A quick note before we begin. Due to lasting effects from 2 strokes and a severe back injury, I use AI to help present my videos. The voice you hear is my own, and the on-screen host is created in my likeness. AI is simply a tool that helps me overcome physical limitations. It does not replace my passion or my work. I personally research, write, and verify every episode. Thank you for your support, and welcome to the History Bob, where America's past comes alive. Now let's begin. Welcome to the History Bob podcast, where America's past comes alive. I'm your host, Robert, the History Bob, and this is Hollywood versus History, the show where we separate historical fact from cinematic fiction. Hollywood has introduced millions of people to some of history's greatest heroes, villains, battles, and turning points. But while movies are designed to entertain, they often take creative liberties with the people and events they portray. Some changes make for great storytelling. Others can completely reshape how we remember history. In each episode, we'll compare what happened on the silver screen with what actually happened in the pages of history. We'll examine the real people behind the characters, the authentic events behind the drama, and uncover the myths, misconceptions, and historical truths that filmmakers sometimes leave behind. Our goal isn't to criticize great movies, we celebrate them. Instead, we use them as a gateway to discover the fascinating stories that inspired them. Because sometimes the real history is even more compelling than the screenplay. So grab your popcorn, open your history book, and join me as we ask one simple question. How much of this really happened? Few movie villains are as memorable as Colonel William Tavington from the Patriot. Ruthless, merciless, a man audiences loved to hate. But was there really an officer like him? The answer is both yes and no. Tonight we're comparing Hollywood's villain with the real British cavalry commander who inspired him, Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton. Before we compare Hollywood's Colonel William Tavington with the real Banastre Tarleton, we first need to understand the world in which both stories take place. The year is 1780. For 5 long years, the American Revolution has raged across the colonies. What began with the shots fired at Lexington and Concord has grown into a full-scale war between Great Britain and its rebellious colonies. Major battles have been fought in New England and the Middle Colonies, but neither side has delivered a decisive blow. The British High Command now believes the key to victory lies in the South. Their strategy is based on a simple assumption, that thousands of loyalists, Americans still faithful to King George III, are waiting to rise up and help restore British authority. If British forces can secure Georgia and the Carolinas, they hope those loyalists will join the fight, isolate George Washington's army, and crush the revolution once and for all. In 1780, British forces captured Charleston, South Carolina, one of the greatest military defeats suffered by the Continental Army during the entire war. With Charleston in British hands, the road appears open for the Crown to reclaim the South, but the campaign would prove far more difficult than British commanders expected. The southern colonies become a brutal battleground. Unlike the large, organized battles of the North, much of the fighting here takes place in forests, swamps, farms, and crossroads. Patriot militia, loyalist units, Continental soldiers, and British regulars clash in a series of fast-moving engagements where surprise attacks, cavalry charges, and partisan warfare become the norm. It is in this harsh and unforgiving theater that one young British cavalry officer earns both admiration from his fellow officers and lasting hatred from many of his enemies. His name is Banastre Tarleton. Bold, fearless, and relentless in battle, Tarleton quickly develops a reputation for speed and aggression. His command, the British Legion, often called the Green Dragoons because of their distinctive green uniforms, becomes one of the most effective mounted forces serving the British Crown in America. Yet his name would also become one of the most controversial of the entire Revolution. Following the Battle of Waxhaws in May 1780, reports spread that Tarleton's men continued attacking American soldiers after they attempted to surrender. Whether this was a deliberate massacre, a tragic breakdown of command, or something in between remains a subject of historical debate. What is certain is that the phrase Tarleton's Quarter became a rallying cry for many patriots, symbolizing the belief that mercy would not be given to those who resisted the British. More than 2 centuries later, filmmakers looking for a villain would draw inspiration from Tarleton's reputation, but not necessarily from the man himself. In the year 2000, audiences met Colonel William Tavington in The Patriot. Ruthless, ambitious, and utterly without compassion, Tavington became one of Hollywood's most memorable Revolutionary War villains. But how much of that character was rooted in history? Where does documented fact end and cinematic fiction begin? That is the question we'll answer today. As we compare the fictional Colonel William Tavington with the real Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton, we'll separate the legend from the historical record and discover that the truth is often far more complex than the movies would have us believe. Now that we've explored the world of the Southern Campaign, it's time to meet the man whose reputation would echo through history and eventually inspire one of Hollywood's most memorable villains. Banastre Tarleton was born in Liverpool, England, on August 21st, 1754. His father was a wealthy merchant involved in the Atlantic trade, and few could have predicted that the young Tarleton would become one of Britain's most recognizable officers during the American Revolution. After his father's death, Tarleton inherited a considerable fortune. Much of it disappeared through gambling and an extravagant lifestyle. Seeking purpose, and perhaps a new beginning, he purchased a commission in the British Army in 1775, just as rebellion erupted across Britain's American colonies. Unlike many officers who relied solely on social standing, Tarleton quickly demonstrated genuine military talent. He was fearless in combat, an exceptional horseman, and possessed an aggressive style of leadership that perfectly suited cavalry warfare. His superiors noticed. By the age of just 25, Tarleton had risen to lieutenant colonel and assumed command of one of Britain's most effective fighting forces in America, the British Legion. The British Legion was unlike most military units of the era. Rather than consisting solely of infantry or cavalry, it combined both into a fast-moving force capable of striking quickly and disappearing before an enemy could respond. Its cavalry wore distinctive green uniforms instead of the traditional British scarlet. That unusual color earned them the nickname that survives to this day, the Green Dragoons. Tarleton trained his men to move rapidly, attack unexpectedly, and exploit every weakness in the enemy's lines. These were not soldiers designed to hold defensive positions. They were hunters. The Southern Campaign. When Britain shifted its attention south in 1780, Tarleton became one of General Charles Cornwallis's most trusted battlefield commanders. His cavalry seemed to appear almost anywhere. They rode long distances with remarkable speed, striking isolated Patriot forces before they could organize a defense. To Loyalists, Tarleton represented confidence and strength. To many Patriots, he became something far more frightening. Following the British capture of Charleston in May 1780, thousands of American soldiers became prisoners. The victory gave Britain control of one of the South's most important ports and appeared to validate the Southern strategy. Momentum favored the crown. Cornwallis now sought to destroy the remaining Continental forces before they could regroup. Tarleton was often given that mission. Only weeks after Charleston fell, Tarleton caught up with Colonel Abraham Buford's retreating American force near the Waxhaws settlement on May 29, 1780. What happened next remains one of the most debated events of the Revolutionary War. According to Patriot accounts, American soldiers attempted to surrender. Instead of accepting that surrender, Tarleton's cavalry allegedly continued attacking. Dozens, and perhaps more than 100, Americans were killed or wounded. British accounts painted a different picture. Some claim Tarleton's horse was shot beneath him during the fighting, causing his men to believe their commander had been killed. Believing themselves under attack, they continued the assault in confusion before order could be restored. More than 2 centuries later, historians still debate exactly what occurred. Was it a deliberate massacre, a battlefield misunderstanding, or something in between? The surviving evidence does not provide a definitive answer. What is beyond dispute is the effect it had on public opinion. Across the southern colonies, stories spread rapidly. The phrase, Tarleton's Quarter, became synonymous with the belief that British cavalry would offer no mercy. Whether completely deserved or not, Tarleton's reputation had been permanently transformed. Despite the controversy surrounding Laxaws, even Tarleton's enemies often acknowledged his military abilities. He excelled at reconnaissance, rapid movement, pursuit, shock attacks. His cavalry repeatedly disrupted Patriot operations throughout the Carolinas. Yet aggressive commanders often walk a narrow line. The same boldness that wins victories can also create costly mistakes. That lesson would become painfully clear in January 1781. Cowpens. Following Daniel Morgan's victory over British forces at Cowpens, Tarleton launched an immediate pursuit. Confident in his ability to overwhelm the Americans, he attacked without allowing his exhausted troops adequate rest. Morgan anticipated exactly that. Using a carefully planned defense, he lured Tarleton into attacking what appeared to be a retreating force. Instead, American militia fired, withdrew according to plan, and drew the British into the waiting Continental regulars. Then Patriot cavalry struck. Within minutes, one of Britain's finest field forces collapsed. Cowpens became one of the greatest tactical victories of the Revolutionary War. Tarleton escaped the battlefield, but much of the British Legion did not. It was a devastating defeat, and one from which neither Tarleton nor Britain's southern campaign would fully recover. Tarleton returned to Britain after the war. Unlike the villain portrayed in The Patriot, his story did not end on an American battlefield. He entered politics, served for many years as a member of Parliament, wrote an account of his military service in America, and remained a controversial figure until his death in 1833. To some, he was an energetic and capable cavalry commander. To others, he embodied the harsh realities of Britain's war in the South. History remembers him as both. So, who was Banastre Tarleton? A fearless officer? An aggressive cavalry commander? A gifted tactician? A ruthless soldier? Perhaps. He was all of those things. And that complexity is precisely what separates history from Hollywood. In our next segment, we'll examine how filmmakers transformed this controversial British officer into the fictional Colonel William Tavington and discover just how much was invented for the screen.
Stupid boy.
By now, we've met the real Tarleton, a young cavalry commander, leader of the British Legion, a gifted officer whose aggressive tactics earned him both victories and lasting controversy. But for millions of people, Tarleton isn't the man we've just explored. He's Colonel William Tavington, the ruthless villain from the 2000 film The Patriot. The question is, how much of Tavington is actually Tarleton? When director Roland Emmerich and screenwriter Robert Rodat created Colonel William Tavington, they needed a villain audiences would immediately fear, rather than inventing one completely from scratch. They borrowed characteristics from several British officers, but one historical figure clearly stands above the rest: Tarleton. The similarities are impossible to ignore. Both commanded green uniformed cavalry. Both fought in the Southern Campaign. Both became feared by Patriot forces. Both were associated with the Battle of Waxhaws. Even Tavington's nickname, the Green Dragoon, comes directly from Tarleton's British Legion. But that's largely where history ends, and Hollywood takes over. The 5 myths of Tavington versus Tarleton myth. Number 1. Tarleton burned churches full of civilians. One of the most memorable and horrifying moments in The Patriot occurs when Tavington locks civilians inside a church and burns it to the ground. It is the defining moment of the character, but there is absolutely no historical evidence Banastre Tarleton ever committed such an act. None. No British reports, no Patriot accounts, no eyewitness testimony, no surviving correspondence. Historians universally regard this scene as fiction. Ironically, the scene resembles atrocities committed in Europe during the Second World War, not the American Revolution. It was created to establish Tavington as an unmistakable cinematic villain. It was never meant to depict an actual event. Myth number 2. Tarleton murdered children. Another shocking moment in The Patriot is Tavington's cold-blooded murder of Thomas Martin. It transforms the conflict into a deeply personal story. Again, there is no historical evidence Banastre Tarleton ever murdered a child during the Revolution. No documented incident resembles the film. This was entirely fictional. Its purpose was emotional storytelling, not historical accuracy. Myth number 3. Tarleton personally hunted one Patriot family throughout the Patriot. Tavington becomes obsessed with Benjamin Martin. He repeatedly attacks the Martin family in an effort to destroy his enemy. It's classic storytelling. A hero, a villain, a personal rivalry. Historically, nothing like this happened. Banastre Tarleton commanded military operations. He pursued armies, militia units, and strategic objectives. He did not spend months hunting one particular family across South Carolina. That narrative exists solely for dramatic effect. Myth number 4. Tarleton was pure evil. Perhaps Hollywood's greatest exaggeration isn't a specific event. It's the character himself. William Tavington possesses virtually no redeeming qualities. He enjoys violence, disregards civilians, shows little compassion, exists almost entirely as the embodiment of evil. Real people are rarely that simple. Banastre Tarleton was controversial, aggressive, sometimes ruthless, but he was also disciplined, highly intelligent, exceptionally brave, and respected even by some of his enemies for his military skill. History paints a much more complicated picture. Myth number 5. Tarleton died at the end in The Patriot. William Tavington dies dramatically during the climactic Battle of Cowpens. Benjamin Martin finally defeats his nemesis. It's one of the film's most satisfying moments. Historically, Banastre Tarleton survived Cowpens. He escaped the battlefield, returned to Britain, served in Parliament, published his memoirs, and lived another 50 years. He died peacefully in 1833. No dramatic duel, no cinematic ending, just history.
At this point, we've met the real Banastre Tarleton. We've explored the Southern Campaign. We've examined the Battle of Waxhaws, and we've separated Hollywood fiction from historical fact. So now comes one final question. Why does any of this matter? After all, The Patriot is just a movie. It never claimed to be a documentary. Why should anyone care whether William Tavington accurately represents Banastre Tarleton? The answer is because movies shape the way millions of people understand history. If there is one reason The Patriot remains so memorable, it is Jason Isaacs' unforgettable portrayal of Colonel William Tavington. From the moment he appears on screen, Tavington is presented as a cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless British cavalry commander. Calm and composed, he rarely raises his voice, making his moments of violence all the more chilling. Isaacs plays the character with unwavering confidence, portraying a man who believes fear is the most effective weapon on the battlefield. Unlike many cinematic villains, Tavington does not seek glory or honor. He is driven by ambition, obedience, and a relentless desire for promotion. Human life, whether friend or foe, means little if it stands in the way of accomplishing his mission. Throughout the film, Tavington leads the fictional Green Dragoons with ruthless efficiency. He orders harsh reprisals against civilians, executes prisoners, burns homes, and commits atrocities that establish him as the embodiment of tyranny. His personal vendetta against Benjamin Martin transforms the war from a conflict between nations into a deeply personal struggle between hero and villain. Jason Isaacs' performance is measured rather than exaggerated. Instead of portraying Tavington as wildly emotional, he presents him as frighteningly controlled, a man who commits terrible acts without hesitation or remorse. That restrained performance has made William Tavington one of the most recognizable antagonists in historical cinema. It is important to remember, however, that while Tavington was inspired in part by Banastre Tarleton, he is a fictional character. Many of his most infamous actions, including the murder of civilians, the burning of a church filled with innocent people, and his obsessive pursuit of one Patriot family, were created for dramatic effect and have no historical basis in Tarleton's actual military career. In the end, Jason Isaacs didn't portray Banastre Tarleton. He portrayed one of Hollywood's most effective fictional villains, a character built from fragments of history, then amplified into an unforgettable cinematic antagonist. For many viewers, The Patriot was their first introduction to the American Revolution. Unlike people who read biographies, visit battlefields, or study original documents, most audiences experience history through film. The images stay with us. The characters become real in our minds. Over time, fiction can become memory. When enough people believe a fictional story, it begins replacing the real one. That's why historical accuracy is important. The American Revolution was not a simple struggle between perfect heroes and evil villains. It was a civil war as much as it was a war for independence. Families fought one another. Neighbors became enemies. Loyalists believed they were defending lawful government. Patriots believed they were defending liberty. Both sides committed acts they later regretted. Both sides produced remarkable leaders and deeply flawed individuals. Reducing that complexity into good versus evil may make for exciting cinema, but it doesn't help us understand the past. History is rarely black and white. More often, it's shades of gray.
None of this means you shouldn't enjoy The Patriot. It's an entertaining film. Its battle scenes are memorable, its performances are outstanding, and it has inspired countless people to take an interest in the American Revolution. In many ways, that's a wonderful thing. But after the credits roll, don't stop there. Read a biography, visit a battlefield, explore original documents, learn about the real people behind the characters, because history is always richer, more surprising, and more fascinating than fiction alone.
So before we go, I'd like to leave you with a question. If you had only watched The Patriot, would you have believed William Tavington was an accurate portrayal of Banastre Tarleton? And now that you've heard the historical record, has your opinion changed? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let's continue the conversation together. After all, history isn't just something we watch, it's something we explore. Thank you for joining me for this edition of Hollywood versus History. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who loves history as much as you do. And if there's another historical movie or television series you'd like to see examined, let me know in the comments. It might become our next episode. Until next time, I'm the History Bob, where America's past comes alive.